Hello, and welcome to the Spec Shaman Podcast, the show that explores the world of building product manufacturers, architects, and engineers, sustainable design, and technology and trends. We engage in thought-provoking discussions with renowned experts, industry pioneers, and visionaries who are making a significant impact in the construction industry. Join us as we explore groundbreaking ideas, revolutionary concepts, and the latest advancements shaping the built environment. The Spec Shaman Podcast is hosted by Laura Elliott, the lead instructional designer at Ron Blank and Associates. Laura is a seasoned interviewer with a passion for uncovering the untold stories behind success. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to the Spec Shaman Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Elliott. I'm joined today by Don Pilz, a senior manager of product development at CEMCO. He's invented multiple firestop products distributed in the U.S. and abroad and holds over 70 patents related to firestopping. Hi, Don. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Of course, we are so excited to have you here today. And I always like to start with our guest's origin story. Can you talk about your history in the building product industry and how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, I got right out of high school, went straight into the trades. That was a family thing. Pretty much all the nephews in my family went to go work for my uncle. So I got in the trades in the San Francisco Bay Area, drywall lather. Basically, we did all the framing for metal studs on the interior wall and the exterior walls. And doing that, you kind of coordinate all the other trades too. So you coordinate the plumbers, the electricians, and then once their work's done, you close it up. We did that both for the interior and the exterior, and also the claddings on the exterior. So that's where I got my start in the trade. It was a union job out there. I did that for about 19 years. And then I was looking for something a little bit different, and I had the opportunity. Part of what I was doing in the trades is if a building was leaking, one of our buildings were leaking, I was typically the guy who went out there and figured out where the leak was coming from. And I really enjoyed that. I got to spend some time with different consultants. They called them building envelope consultants, and I got to work with a few of them. And one of them in particular, when we were done wrapping up with the job, I told him, I said, hey, if I ever get tired of this, I'd love to look you up and maybe come work for you. And sure enough, a few years later, I reached out to him, got out of the trade, and got into construction defects. So I was a building envelope consultant. So that was a lot of fun. I got to do that. And what I found out in that space is that when it comes to construction defects, you could eliminate that defect more times than not by just addressing the source. That's one thing I really figured out in that. I know that sounds easy, right? Address the source. But what it is like if there is water, let's say it's on the ground floor, first floor, and it's a 5-story building, and we go into a unit and there's water on the floor. Well, you got to go figure out where that water is coming from. It's not necessarily coming from the other side of the wall. So you'd have to go on the outside, use a spray rack, figure it out at the point of entry, mimic that water, and then you got to go figure out how to stop it. You figured out the source. Now you got to figure out how to stop it. And so the other thing I learned with that is that a lot of times, basically with some of these defects, if you just had a better product offering or maybe a better performing product, you could eliminate this really simply by just finding the source and finding a better way to build it or a better product. I've seen that there's a disconnect really between the needs of the builder and whatever the manufacturers were offering. That was a big thing. So let's say I'm on a job and I need a flashing that had a 3-inch leg down to a 4-inch leg with an angle kick on it. And I couldn't find that because nobody was selling that. So I'd find what was off the shelf and try to make it work. I'm using one example, but that could be for anything, right? You're taking a round peg into a square hole, and you try to force it in and try to make it work. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of these construction defects would come from. So now, after all these years of starting in the trades, using different products, getting into construction defects, now I run the product development department for the company whose products I was using when I was in the trades. So it's all kind of come full circle.
Well, that's a great story. I love the applied knowledge part of it. I think that it's one thing to study it in a theoretical sense and then go right into, product defects, but to have the background and understanding the orchestration of construction is so vital to being able to do what you're doing now successfully, because you actually understand, what it takes to make something work and to find the flaw, right? So
Mhm.
that's really wonderful. You do hold an impressive array of patents. Could you tell me a little bit about your journey in creating them?
Sure, that's kind of a fun story because it's probably not the route most people go. First time I basically picked up a book, Patents for Dummies. I think that was literally the title of it, and I just researched it. And I researched how to
Mhm.
come up, how to write a patent, and what ultimately, after reading all that, there was an advertisement on TV, which you don't always want to go with, but I did. It was a online service. I won't say the name of it, but they did a great job, and I was able to, for $300, to file a provisional patent. And what a provisional patent is, what's really cool about that is you have 1 year to pitch that product to a manufacturer and spending a very little amount of money. So three,
Mhm.
$400, you get a provisional patent done online. You actually do have a patent pending status at that time. So I took that patent pending status. I went out to a couple different manufacturers that were local to me in the Bay Area. I pitched the idea and I got super lucky because the very first two that I contacted took a licensing agreement with me, and all I had was a provisional patent. I mean,
Oh my
I didn't have to
goodness.
tell them how detailed it was. I just had to tell them. And I think what it was is really having that background in the field. They bought
Mm,
into it right away. They
mhm.
seen the need because I described it. They seen that they could make the product, and they seen that they could sell the product. So I
Yeah.
was going to be, filtering all that work towards them, and it worked out. Eventually, when I went to the current company that I'm working with, now I work with their patent lawyer. And so it's just kind of the same process. I come up with the idea, then I do a search on it, make sure nobody else has that idea. Then I pitch it to the lawyer, show them all the pros and cons of it, and then they either say, yes, that's patentable, or no, it's not. And then we work from there. Believe me, I had no idea it was 70. I just recently did a search on that to find out it was 70. I've been doing this since 2008, and every couple of years, patents are coming out. So that's how it added up. And they've done really well for us. It's been a lot of fun. You get to be really creative, and I got a really good lawyer that we work with. So it's been a lot of fun.
No, that's a great journey. I love that story, especially getting it out of the gate right away. Just having somebody say, "Yeah, let's license that." That's a fantastic backdrop for what it is that you're doing. So that's
Yeah.
amazing. So you focus specifically on fire stopping and saving lives. Could you tell me a little bit about why fire stopping is important and how it does save lives and property?
Okay. So yeah, the first part about this, when I get asked that question, why is fire stopping important? Of course, because it saves lives, right? If you're in a building, you want to make sure that you could get out, exit that building on time, or have, I shouldn't say on time, have enough time to get out of a building. So some
Mhm.
walls are rated for 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, even up to 4 hours. So what they're trying to do with fire stopping is provide proper egress of a building.
Mhm.
Okay. And then there's two different types. There's passive fire stopping. That's in a passive fire stopping. That's going to be all the joints are sealed. So when I talk about a joint, you build a wall, it goes all the way up to let's call it a concrete floor.
Mhm.
If you see a high-rise building and they got post-tension slabs, so the wall is going to go up to that floor slab. Now that floor slab is going to deflect. It's going to move up and down. It's going to settle. As each floor is being poured as it goes up, it's going to move. So it's constantly moving during construction and after construction.
Mhm.
So we build this, and we want to make sure that if a fire comes in a passive fire stopping, we want to make sure the fire protection is there. In other words, we're not relying on electrical alarms or sprinklers. I'm not saying
Mhm.
sprinklers aren't a good thing, but sprinklers are called active fire protection.
Right.
And I'm of the camp where both of them should come together, right? Going back
Mhm.
to my construction defects days, we called it belt and suspenders. Always have a backup plan. Don't just rely on
Mhm.
one. Water goes out, electricity goes out, that sprinkler doesn't work. You still want to make sure people get out of the building. So having a combination of the two is a really good way to go. And again, that's the bottom line, right? We want to save lives. We don't want to have a building. We've heard stories of tragic fires that have taken lives of a lot of people. So we want to make sure that we're giving everybody a fair fighting chance to get out of the building. That's why it's important.
No, I mean, there's very little else that is as important as that. I don't know if you know this, but I have a friend from college that was in a fire that was really, really life-threatening, and he barely made it out, but he did. So I take this type of topic very seriously because I know that it can really impact people in a profound way. When you're looking at fire stopping, how does it preserve the structural integrity of a building?
Okay, so this is where other other people are going to get involved. The structural engineer, and that's why structural engineer, architect, engineer, they should all be on the same page because ultimately, yeah, we want to preserve the structural integrity of a building. So let's think about it in this way. Keep in mind the building is always moving. Obviously, it's moving during construction, but then after it's built, it's also settling.
Hmm.
Then we've got wind sway. We've
Hmm.
got loading and unloading. Let's see, I got a new neighbor, a new tenant is upstairs. That's going to affect that floor. I've got seismic movement if I'm in a seismic zone. I've got expanding soils that will rise the ground up.
Hmm.
I got snow loads. So all of these different things are going to make that building move. Okay. And what happens with movement? Well, things could crack. If we don't properly protect these, allow these walls to move, allow all our joints to be flexible so that wall could go up and down, we're going to get cracks. Now, what happens with cracks? Well, I've seen plenty of fire tests. One of the things that I do in this job is I get to witness a lot of fire tests and I see how critical cracks in the drywall can be. So
Hmm.
if I got unprotected cracks, that fire is going to go through a whole lot faster. Once that drywall, that's my line of defense, once that starts to crack and fall off, now that fire is going to get through a whole lot faster. This is also why drywall control joints are so important, right? We've got a big, huge wall in a gymnasium or something, and that wall happens to be fire rated. We want to make sure we got control joints up there. We're breaking up that
Hmm.
panel so it doesn't crack. Now, the other thing you want to consider with that is to have a flexible fire stopping. Again, this is going to allow the
Hmm.
building to move up and down without cracking that top of the drywall or even inside the wall. You get cracks, along the seams. You get cracks in there too if there's too much pressure on that wall. So picture that wall just kind of floating in place, like the building's moving and I'm able to just kind of move with it. I'm not so
Hmm.
rigid, I'm flexible. So by doing that, now my drywall integrity is still there. My joint protection is still there, right? So let's say if the joint cracks, and let's say they're using a fire cylinder, it cracks, and right behind that is a slotted track. Slotted track has open slots on it. Well, now smoke could get right through. Eventually, fire will
Hmm.
get right through. So all
Hmm.
these little things could allow that fire to go through. So movement is a really big thing that a lot of people don't pay too much attention to. You get that old adage, that's the way I've always done it. Well, yeah, maybe, but a lot of
Hmm.
issues have arisen from that we now know. That reminds me of a story when I was in construction defects. It was a case that went to court, and I'm on the stand, and I was prepping for it. I'm a little nervous about it. And my
Hmm.
boss at the time said, "Hey, when you go in there, you answer every question honestly
Yeah.
to what you know. And
Hmm.
then later on, during more discovery that comes out in the test, if you find yourself on the stand again, you could say, hey, I didn't at the time that I during my deposition. Yes, I said this, but I found out later that actually
Yeah.
this is how this product works. You could
Hmm.
change it because you're always telling the truth. So always tell the truth. So the same thing with
Yeah.
this. Somebody says, that's the way I've always done it. Yeah, but you know what? We found out it doesn't work. We found out it
Right.
doesn't work because this fire happened and these people didn't live. So
Right.
you've got to be able to be able to learn from past failures and adapt and change.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to learn there, right? From the impacts of real life data, right? And how something really actually does perform. And it's great to have an evolving understanding. One of the things that I love to say is our knowledge is fluid, right? It's not concrete, it's not permanent. And as long as we continue to craft products that continue to meet the evolving need, that's the point. And also truth is always the way to go. I think,
Exactly.
I think it's just a great philosophy in general, especially when you're under oath.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you'd be surprised. I've seen some not testify too well, but it always comes out though. That's the thing. You think you
Yeah.
might get away with it, you're not.
No, yeah, my father was a lawyer, so
Okay, so yeah,
I understand the practiced
Yeah, yeah,
research that goes into finding the truth in things. So,
exactly.
that's great advice to get. So let's look at the three main threats: fire, smoke, and toxic gas. How does an efficient fire stopping system mitigate those threats? Like how does it actually do it?
Okay, so first off, the main threat is going to be smoke. Okay, that's the
Mm-hmm.
main. The NFPA has done a lot of research on this, and some of their stats that they came up with is that they say 3/4 of all fire deaths are caused by smoke inhalation. It's not like they
Mm-hmm.
got burned, it was smoke inhalation that got them. 57% of all the people killed in a fire were not in the room of the fire's origin, they were down the hall, someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
47% of the survivors caught in the fire could not see more than 12 feet in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
smoke can travel, depending on the conditions, anywhere from 120 to 420 feet per minute. So, in other words, you're not outrunning it. You cannot outrun that smoke. If you're in there, you're
Right.
not going to outrun it.
Right.
I'll give you another example of how fast it travels. Okay, so let's say you and I are in a room, and that room is 20 feet by 20 feet by 20 feet tall. Okay, the fire is directly in the next room. And
Mm-hmm.
the only thing we have in between it, we've got a fire rated wall, but in that fire rated wall, there's a hole just the size of a pencil going through from the room of the fire to the room we're both in.
Mm-hmm.
How long do you think it'll be before we cannot see 18 inches in front of our face?
Maybe about 10 minutes.
3 minutes, 40 seconds.
Oh man.
That's fast,
That's
right? I mean,
really fast.
it might come in really slow. You're aware of it, man. You got to get out of that room quick. So
Mm-hmm.
now think about it. Where do you think you might look in the room that you're in right now? Look around the walls. Where do you think? Well, you might be at your home office. Let's say you're in an office.
Yeah.
Where do you think a pencil hole might be? An unsealed pencil hole, I should say.
Like where the door opens and somebody doesn't have a protector there.
You know what? That's not a bad guess either, because that's true too. If it's unsealed, anything unsealed, basically.
Yeah.
But my mind always goes to data cables, right? Happens all the time.
Yeah,
We
that makes
switch them,
sense.
we forget to seal them. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why some insurance companies will require that an inspector goes back out, pops up all the T-bar ceilings, and looks to make sure everything is properly sealed, everything is
Hmm.
properly fire rated, because you don't want any unsealed holes up there because it'll travel right through.
Hmm.
So you said, what can we do to mitigate that threat of smoke? All right, what
Yeah.
we want to do is prevent smoke from passing through. I know that sounds simple, right? But what we want to do is have a tightly sealed gaps, all of them. Now,
Mm-hmm.
here's where it gets a little tricky, right? So now I've got a structural engineer that says, okay, this building is going to move 3/4 inch up and 3/4 inch down. So that means I need a gap, a joint that will protect for 1.5 inches of movement. That's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
movement.
Yeah.
And so how do I do that? I've got to allow that wall to cycle up and down and still seal that
Mm-hmm.
joint. Well, let's make it even harder. You know, well, let's put a slotted track on there. So now a slotted track is your header track that the gap is right in front of all those open slots. So as soon as I get a crack in that fire stopping, I got an open slot and it could go right through.
Yeah.
So that's really tough. So you need to find a system that is going to provide that movement and maintain that flexibility for the life, hopefully for the life of the assembly. So you need
Yeah.
a flexible joint that allow movement. Now, let's say you're an architect, because this question gets asked a lot. And they
Mm-hmm.
say, well, I want all my walls to have a smoke rating.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is where it gets a little tricky, right? They should have, I wish UL would have called it a smoke rating, but they don't. They call it an L rating. It's an air leakage rating. So this is the way they take that test. They'll take your wall assembly, your joint, your open joint. Now it's open. Let's say it's open an 1.5 inches, and it's got some kind of fire stopping in there. And
Mm-hmm.
then they put it on this pressurized um, test mechanism that is going to force air through that joint. On
Uh-huh.
the other side, it's going to have a plastic bag that's going to catch that air. And they're going to test it in ambient condition and then
Mm.
400 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, why do you think that might be? Why would they test it at two different temperatures?
Because they'll get two different results.
They will get two different, yeah, absolutely. The end result is, yeah, two different results. But there's another more specific reason. Let's say we're in a room and the fire is on the other side of the corridor in that
Mm-hmm.
last corner unit, right? We're all
Mm-hmm.
huddled up. It's not that hot, right? Because we're not in the origin of fire. We
Right.
just want to make sure no smoke could get through. So
Right.
they're going to test it in an ambient condition to make sure that even if the building's not hot, it's going to still provide smoke protection.
Yeah.
And then they'll take it up to 400 degrees. Now, I will tell you that a lot of preformed fire stopping that's out there today use intumescent. Intumescent will start to expand around 350 degrees Fahrenheit, most of
Mm-hmm.
them. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so now they're going to test that at 400 degrees. Now, this intumescent might start to expand. But what it
Yeah.
tells the end user is, hey, I got an L rating even before it expanded, the intumescent expanded, and I got an L rating even after when it barely started to expand. So it's
Right.
really telling the end user that you're protected either way. Now, again, a little bit of a tricky part here. Back when I was in the trades, we had walls that were building that were smoke barrier, and then we had walls that were fire rated. And I got to
Mm-hmm.
tell you, the way we built it was almost the same exact way. It's just one was labeled smoke and one was labeled fire. And
Hmm.
it comes down to the way they test it. A little
Mm-hmm.
confusing. Well, in 2006, the International Building Code adopted this L rating that I'm talking about right now,
Mm-hmm.
adopted it into UL 2079. I'll touch on that a little bit later. This is all stuff that would be in your specs. So
Right.
now, if you're an architect, you could put in your specs, okay, it needs to comply with UL 2079, and you could say, and comply with L rating. There's a
Mm.
reason why I'm saying and comply
Right.
with L rating is because the standard, believe it or not, the L rating is optional. So if you're listening, you're an architect right now, and
Oh
you say,
man.
I want an L rating, just put it in there. Go ahead. I used to
Right.
write specs when I was doing construction defects too.
Mm-hmm.
Specs to me is like, again, like a belt and suspenders. I would look at a job. The architects, it's tough to catch every single condition or note every
Sure.
single note, right? So
Right.
the specifications is that assurance because a contractor is supposed to look at the details, look at the plans, and look at the specifications. And I look at it this way, just in case something's missed on the plans, I covered it in the specification. And you could make those more robust. You could put additional things in there. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things I would do is keep something in mind. The building code is the minimum.
Right.
Okay? It's the
Right.
minimum. It's just the bare minimum. And I don't mean to be rude and say, oh, it's the bare minimum. I'm just saying that's a
Right.
fact.
No.
It's
Right.
just the bare minimum. So when I would write
Yeah.
a spec, like for stucco accessories, the minimum galvanized coating on that was G60.
Mm-hmm.
When I thought, oh, that's the bare bones. I'm going to take this up and write in the specs to go to G90. Now I got
Mm-hmm.
50% more galvanized coating on this. And now the contractor has to read this. It's not that big of a deal for them to upgrade to a thicker coating. It's not that big of a deal, but it's written in the specs. Now they got to do it. And if they don't,
Mm-hmm.
and something happens, then this is again construction defects. You refer back to the specs. Oh, no, it says right here you were supposed to use G90. Well, in this case, we'll do the same thing for an L rating. So a contractor submits all his UL listings, and three
Mm-hmm.
of them don't have an L rating on it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it gets accepted, it gets built, and then later on they find out. Hopefully, it's something like the guy next door is a smoker, and you got smoke coming through, and then they go through and they look and they see the system that they listed or they submitted, and it doesn't have an L rating. Now that architect's going to go to the contractor and says, "Hey, my specification says provide an L rating. You got to go
Mm-hmm.
back up there and fix it."
Mm-hmm.
So just keep in mind, as an architect, you can make that building requirements more robust in your specification uh, section to do that. So that'd be one way to do it.
Why do you think that they don't have an L rating as a like a baseline?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, um, I'm not 100% sure, right? We've just been talking about how deadly smoke is,
Yeah.
right? And now it's an option. I don't know. I
I
don't know the answer to that. But I do know this, that if you're an architect, you could make it mandatory. That's your
Right.
job. So
Yeah, no.
go ahead and make it mandatory.
Let's push that, because let's stop the smoke, right? I
Yeah,
mean, we should start a campaign, you know, on
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
That might be the title of this episode. Who knows? Um, so then let's look at the main components of fire stopping systems. What are they, and can you break those down?
Okay, so when you say are you talking different types? Or are you talking because I could talk about the different types. That's probably the better way to address it.
Okay.
There are what's that?
Okay.
Okay. So there's different types, different fire stopping that could be used. And I'll break them down into a couple of different categories. Encumbered systems. That means that joint is filled with some type of a material. And let's for this example use sealant. Now, sealant came out when this first started becoming a bigger issue was in the early 80s. And when that happened, fire stopping manufacturers started coming up, and I can't say names here, but there was quite a few that got into the game and provided sealants for these joints. Now that made a lot of sense, right? Because sealants are used for a lot of different things. So sealants would be a good thing to put in there. And so sealants were started to be filled in these joints. Now let's talk about the movement that you would get in this. So in an encumbered system, you're going to get a percentage of that movement. So let's say the joint is 1 inch wide and the UL listing says it's going to get 25% compression, 25% extension. That means 1/4 inch down, 1/4 inch up. So you got a 1 inch joint. It gets 1/2 inch movement. Now I'm going to tell you how deceptive this could be. Not deceptive. It's just that people really don't know. When I was still in the trades, back then the joints were even smaller because the movement requirement wasn't as big. And I would do a 1/2 inch joint and fill that 1/2 inch joint with fire sealant. I honestly thought I was providing a 1/2 inch of movement. I wasn't providing anything close to that, because again, that sealant gets hardened and it loses that flexibility. So you don't get that much movement in it. Okay, so that's encumbered systems. Well, then you have unencumbered systems, and those systems will typically be, well, let's say you've got a track, head of wall track, and you could stick a fire stopping device right to the side of that. Typically, they're pretty thin. Then the drywall goes over that, and then it cycles up and down. So that fire stopping is always on that track. So that joint can move up and down, and that joint is still completely protected. That's called unencumbered movements. And then other things, there's also fire-rated drywall accessories. So drywall accessories, everybody knows what those are, like corner beads, L beads. Well, now there's systems out there where you could take the drywall accessory, it will be combined with a flexible, maybe a bubble gasket, and intumescent. So it's going to provide your movement, your sound rating, your smoke rating, your fire rating, and it's going to be in one single piece. So it's sold just like a drywall, just like a drywall accessory. So it's come a long ways. There's a lot of different types of way to provide fire stopping. I'd also say that over the last 5 to 7 years is one that's really changed. One of those reasons why it's changed so much is in the 2012 International Building Code. So the International Building Code, we're in the US, everybody's building by that code. It gets updated every couple of years. In 2012, they introduced special inspections into fire stopping. Now, this is a big change. Prior to that, being in the trade, the only special inspections I seen was on welding, right? More times than not, a city inspector could come out and do the electrical, the drywall, the framing, everything. But when it came to welding, that was a very specific type of inspector that would do that.
Well, DWI.
Yeah, exactly. Now, fire stopping, same thing. Now, the way this came up to be is an inspector comes out to the job. They look up 20 feet up in the air. They see red sealant. They don't know if it's installed right. They have no idea. So they're passing it without really knowing. So then other people were, there's gaps or separation. So they really wanted to make sure this was being done right. So they introduced this special third-party inspections. Now, the way it works on the first go-around, 2012, is any building above 75 feet tall. The reason they chose 75 feet tall, because that's the max of the fire department's ladder. So anything above that would be high risk. They also said category 3 and 4.
I see.
So that's going to be jails, hospitals, schools. And they even put one more caveat in there, owner's discretion, basically. They could still.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting about this, though, it's not the GC's responsibility to hire this third-party inspector. It's the owner developers. Now you can see why, right? Conflict of interest.
Sure.
So it's up to the owner. Now, if the owner opts out, well, then it's not on his building that he ever done this. And I think that would be weighed against them. So it's in your best interest to do this. So the owner would get this. And now, because of that, I think the fire stopping manufacturers quickly found out, whoa, we got a problem. If you start checking all of my fire sealant, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble, because fire sealant is prone to separation. Dusty edge, they could separate, and I got to go back and fix it. And to fix it, it's tough, right? Say my sealant separated from the drywall. I've got to cut out that whole joint. Let's say it's 1 inch wide, 1.25 inches deep. I got to cut it all out and reapply it. Do you imagine what that'll do to your job? How much it'll slow it up? Well, the fire stopping manufacturers figured this out. And I'd say since 2015, we've entered into a new category of fire stopping, which is now generically called preform fire stopping. So if you're a spec writer out there and you want to know how to include this, just put it in there, preform fire stopping in your spec. And then that gives the contractor the option of, okay, I got preform fire stopping. This is what I want to submit. It's on the spec. So they're free to use that in their bid, their quote.
So are fire stopping systems difficult for the contractor to install?
Yeah, they could be really difficult to install. You think about this. Okay, I'm not sure if you've been out on a building as it's being built, but I'm sure you maybe seen pictures.
Oh, yeah.
You're walking down a corridor, you got all the plumbing, the mechanical, the electrical, and now we design on BIM. So we're able to build that on a computer and then hopefully go out there in the field and replicate it. But in a computer module, you could get everything really tight, right? So now I'm a contractor and I got to go all the way to the top of that 20-foot high wall, got to go around all the pipes, and I got to go put fire sealant up there. That's going to be super tough. Not to mention, now the inspector's got to go up there with a flashlight and a mirror and make sure it's all done. Now, earlier I was talking about construction defects, and if you could find the source of the problem, then you could really do product development. So finding the source. Okay, what's the source here? What's the issue? The issue is I've got to wait till after the drywall is on before I can install my fire sealant. Well, that's an issue, right? Because now by that time, all your MEPs are in, your mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. That's all in. Now I got to fight it. So what's the solution? Well, here's a solution. If you use preform fire stopping, when you put up your track before the drywall, before all the MEPs, when everything's wide open, I could put my fire stopping up there. And then when the drywall goes over, I'm done. Never getting back up there. So that's a simple solution to make sure every inch of your fire stopping joint is tight, secure, no smoke's going to get through there. It's going to speed up your job, because now I don't have to, poor inspector, I always felt sorry for them. How are they going to inspect this? They have to sign it off. They got to sign their name off of it. And just the fact of unknowing if every inch is covered, it's got to be something that weighs heavy on them.
Yeah, sure.
So that's an example of just coming up, changing the product just a little bit. And where we change it is how it is installed. I'm going to install it before the drywall, because I know my issue is after the drywall's up, it's tough.
Right.
But that doesn't work in all cases. Let's say I'm doing a project and it's cross-laminated timber. And I got this beautiful wood deck and I want to leave it exposed. I don't necessarily want to take fire sealant and go from my drywall up to that beautiful wood. So in that case, I'll use a fire-rated drywall accessory. I got to use a drywall accessory anyways. Might as well use it. Now it's clean. Now it won't crack. It'll allow that deck to move up and down. And I've got a nice, clean, consistent joint all the way around. Again, this was a simple fix. I took a problem where sealant separates. It doesn't look all that good aesthetically. It doesn't move really after that first year. It's going to be very limited movement, over to something that's going to provide maybe a 10-year, 20-year sustainable life warranty, remain flexible, and look good for the life of the building. Just a simple tweak.
Yeah, changing the order of operations.
Yes, exactly.
That's brilliant. You have touched a little bit on the building codes. What are the building codes that design professionals should be aware of when they're working on this specification?
Okay, so first off, the first one that I was talking about earlier is the International Building Code. Now that's going to be already in your specs,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where I get to work with a lot of architects, and I'm not saying that the spec writers are in a camp and the drafters and the designers are in a different camp, but I will say they both rely on each other to do their job well, right?
Mm-hmm.
I see some spec writers, they put everything in there just to keep it so they're covered. And then the
Mm-hmm.
designers are more looking for aesthetic. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was consulting, it was always this constant uh, I would say function over design. When I was
Mm-hmm.
talking to architects, I would say, I got to go function over design. I want to work with you on your design, but if it doesn't work, we're screwed. You got to make sure it could perform the way you want it to perform. So, in saying this, the International Building Code, spec writers may know a whole bunch about that, right? But maybe
Mm-hmm.
the design team doesn't. And you think, okay, so what? Well, it could affect your schedule because if I've got a third party inspector, let's say I got a 20-story building and it's a condo and I got a third party inspector out there. This has happened a lot. I know I'm out in California, so you might think it happens more out here. It does, but it happens in other places too,
Mm-hmm.
where the whole job could be shut down. So now this inspector comes out and says, oh, no, that sealant separated. Nope, you got to wait till that
Yeah.
cures. Oh, I got to come back for this. Oh, I got to wait another 3 weeks for that to cure. So
Oh my gosh.
all these little tiny delays delay the
Mm-hmm.
job. Now, if the spec writer and the designer are both on the same page and they know, oh man, this is a third party inspection, we may want to go with preform fire stopping because with preform
Mm-hmm.
fire stopping, it goes in fully cured. I don't have to wait for a cure time. In preform fire stopping, I don't have to do necessarily destructive testing, right? Because it's not going to separate. So there's no
Right.
destructive testing. And the inspector knows, hey, there's intimess in that product. I know as long as the gap is the right size, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to work.
Right.
So these are little things that they want to talk about. So that's in the International Building Code. But then outside of that, there are a couple other things. Oh, by the way, that's chapter 17 of the International Building Code.
Okay.
2021, they changed it again.
Of course.
Now it's occupancy of 250 or greater.
Mm.
Okay.
That makes
So now
sense.
I could be in the Midwest where maybe the buildings aren't that tall, so I don't have to worry about that 75 feet. You might think,
Mm.
whew, we never built 75 feet. I don't even care. That's never going to affect me. Well, now it does, because now if you've got 250 people in that building, now
Right.
that's also for that. So it's something you got to be aware of. The other thing that's going to be in that spec, and this is more for security more than really uh, you need to know too much about it. But you're going to have the ASTM E1966, which is a fire rating. It's just going to tell you this temperature curve to make sure it complies with the fire rating 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour. And then UL 2079 is also related to that same temperature curve. But in UL 2079, if it's a dynamic joint, they're going to cycle that joint up and down and make sure that in the
Mm.
most wide open position, it will still prevent fire, smoke, and sound from not sound on that test, but fire and smoke and heat transfer to go through that joint. So those pretty much are all in your specs. The only one I'd want to be aware of is that International Building Code. Make sure everybody's on the same page.
What a marvelous thing. Honestly, it just, I think probably in your lifetime, right? You're seeing these enormous changes that really do make meaningful solutions to protect life and safety and even integrities of buildings. So that's great. I mean, I just want to take a minute to appreciate it because I think that, we're evolving and the codes are changing and sometimes that can be a little bit of a headache, right? Because you gotta understand what the evolution is and I think it's just a marvel to understand that really what that means is that we're saving lives, right? And that's really the whole point. So I just think it's an honorable field to be working in. So let's look at some of those really precious lives, right? We're looking at schools and hospitals and even like office spaces and things like that. Um, how does the fire stopping system work for those? Does that cover that 250 capacity ruling?
Well, so yeah, if you're looking at schools, hospitals, and buildings, do fire stopping systems go into those? Absolutely, every single one of them. So if I'm in a dorm, right, my next door neighbor, that wall is fire rated. So my unit is a fully fire rated unit. I have 1 hour to get out. Typically it's 1 hour. So I got 1 hour, which is great, right? So each individual unit has a fire rating around it. And then the corridor has a fire rating. The stairs have a fire rating. Okay. So I should be able to get out of there without a problem.
Yeah.
Right. But let's go into an office building. Okay. Not the office buildings are not individually fire rated. You'll notice when you come up the stairs, a lot of times you'll see an egress map by that exit door.
Yep.
And that's going to tell you, okay, this is my zone and this is my exit way out. So I'm going to go down these stairs, and this, usually they'll have a dotted line around it, and that'll show you your egress path to get out. So it's done a different way for that. But hotels, dorms, apartments, senior living, all of those that are individual units, it's an individually rated unit. So it's good. I think that's really good. But it same doesn't apply to hospitals and offices. Hospital will have zones as well. So individual, patient rooms are not fire rated typically, but the corridors are and the stairs are.
Right. That's, just creating those paths for egress.
Yeah.
So I might throw a little bit of a curveball. What does this mean for retrofitting?
That's you're talking my language there. I love retrofitting because it brings me back to my construction defects days, right? So you get a job and there's an issue with it. The last thing people want to hear is they got to rip the whole job back apart.
Right.
So is there a way to do retro? Yes. There are products out there that can do a retro. Let's say you're a contractor and you're patching into a hospital. You're going to do a new wing. Right. So you're gonna buy that first wall that you're tying into is now part of it. But let's say that fire joint was done 30 years ago. There's cracks all over it. You got to redo it. You got to make sure it's fire protection. So there are devices. So that's another key word there. So fire stop device.
Okay.
Those are going to be systems that are not wet applied. They're fully cured. Easier to install. And there's what I like to call belt suspenders built into it, right? Because it's going to be a robust product. So yeah, you can look into products that could do a retrofit over the top of a joint and make it fire rated. So that's a good and important point that we see from time to time.
That's fabulous, especially for like historical preservation and things like that. You want to try to build those into buildings that probably never even considered fire stopping in their original iteration. So
yeah, exactly.
That's very valuable. Is there a case study that you'd like to highlight for like a project where fire stopping systems were used?
Yeah. Okay. So the company that I work for, they sell metal studs. So they're going to do everything from I'm talking to contractors basically that are building the wall, doing the drywall, doing the fire stopping. So I get to talk to a lot of different people. That's what makes my job fun about doing product development. I get to hear their problems. And on way more than one occasion, I'll be talking to a contractor that maybe just wrapped up their fire sealant inspection, and they're just pulling their hair out of their head because they said, my building's constantly moving. So my sealant separates. So I got to go back and touch it up. It's just constant. Just can't stand it. I wish I had something that was just so flexible that the building could move and move and move, and I don't have to go back. So this happens quite a bit. I was on another job as a school project, a huge dorm, 12 different buildings. And the first contractor had used sealants, all sealants. And I went out to the job and I'm showing them some preform fire stopping. They said, okay, we want you to come out and install it. So little did I know I was going to have a big audience with me. And they're all out there and they pick a very difficult place to install. And I was just shaking my head. I said, I knew it. I got 20 people watching me. You're going to help me go do this. So they're poking and having their fun. And I get up there and luckily it just took a second to install. I come back down and one of the guys is just really ribbing the other guy. So I had to walk up and say, hey, what's going on? He goes, I did the last phase of this tower. of this student housing project, and I
Uh,
had to redo the fire sealant twice because it
uh,
separated so much. If I was using that, I would never have to go back. So yeah,
that's
I
crazy.
blew it. So in jobs like that, you could really see a difference. We also had another contractor. He had two towers in San Francisco. He used one with fire sealant, and then we went into their office and was telling him about some preform fire stopping solutions. And he says, "Okay, I'm going to use it. It's a design build. I get to use whatever I want. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a case study on this, and I'll let you know if we saved any money because typically preform fire stopping is more expensive than traditional means and methods of sealant, but the labor's a lot faster." So he goes, "I'm going to see if that's actually true." So built both jobs. When it was all said and done, he called me up after all the numbers were in. He said, "Hey, I'm happy to report that it was a 35% savings using preform fire stopping."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there are, again, the product's more expensive, but it's going to last a lot longer. Sealants are
Yeah.
going to typically provide a 1 to 3 year performance warranty. I know people think that's crazy, but it's the truth. And then preform fire stopping is going to give you anywhere from 10 to 20 to some will give you sustainable life warranty. So there's just so many benefits, and the industry is really shifting. I would
Mm-hmm.
say there's been a lot of industry professionals that know a lot more about this than I do. But it's in the next 3 to 4 years, you're going to see 80% of the market will be preformed fire stopping, and sealants will be, because of all the stuff that we've been talking about during this
Mm-hmm.
podcast and other reasons, it's just going to be a limit. Just better technology comes, and that's what happens,
Yeah.
right? Better
Yeah.
technology comes.
The market moves,
Exactly. Exactly.
and especially that upfront investment, I think just is so important. I'll always buy the most expensive whatever if I know that it's going to last a lifetime, right? So,
Exactly.
because you're just,
Now add in life safety to it, right?
yeah,
So
right. Like that's
exactly.
it. You can't put a price on that. So I think that that's a solid place to spend some money.
Exactly.
Um, so what is the future of fire stopping? You're saying that in 3 to 5 years, it looks like this is going to be the way that people are going. Is there any other things upcoming?
Yeah, so I would say back in 15 there might have been two or three companies with a preform fire stopping, but now I'd say every single major fire stopping manufacturer has a version of preform fire stopping. They're
Hmm,
all a little bit different.
sure.
Okay. Some provide more movement, less movement. Some are on a drywall accessory, some aren't. But the important part is that because of that code change, and again, code changes. Keep in mind why code changes happen, typically
Right.
from a tragic event,
Sure.
right? What's going on in Grenfell right now is I was in the UK last year,
Hmm.
and they're retrofitting a lot of those exterior walls out there.
Hmm.
Another interesting fact, the UK is the first country to do this. They are having the architect sign off on the fire rating for a project.
Mm, that's
Usually, like in the
serious.
U, that's serious. In the US, we don't have
Yeah.
that kind of liability at all.
Right.
But
Right.
that's
Not
what they're
not
doing.
yet.
Not yet, yeah,
Not
because you
yet.
got architect firms that are in London, that are in LA, that are in Chicago,
Hmm.
same firm. So yeah, you're seeing some big changes here. But again, this is a good thing, right?
Right.
That should have never happened in Grenfell. That should have never happened. But
Sure.
when these tragic things happen, the code does change and things get better. So introducing special
Right.
inspections is going to make the industry a lot better. It's going to give you a better, longer lasting product that is easier to install. And why do I say easier to install? Well, when I was doing the construction defects days, one of the things I noticed is I'd see some of these details from these third party building envelope consultants, and I'd look at them and go, oh my God, these are so difficult. And I would look at the
Mm,
crew and think, you probably got one guy that could do this right. You need to
right.
have a detail your average guy can install. And that's what
Right.
I've always focused on in product development. You got to have the lowest guy be able to install this without messing it up. And then you've got a winning product. Because if it's
Sure.
too difficult, hey, let's face it, there is a true labor shortage in construction. So you want to make things
100%.
low risk as possible. So that's what you should focus on.
No, that's brilliant. You know, simplifying something so that we can get it installed is really the point, right? Because we want to have it everywhere. So we got to make it as usable as possible. Are there going to be new materials upcoming in this industry?
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to see it just continue to evolve, and
Mm,
some things will fade away, some things will stand out and get accepted. But yeah, I think it's going to be something that it will continue to evolve until we've just got a really good fit, because it's a lot of different conditions. Like all fire
sure.
rated joints aren't the same. Some you want to look beautiful, some you don't care about. Some you have 4-inch movement, some you have a 1/4 inch movement. So there's a wide range of the type of fire stopping that you need.
Hmm. Well, what an integrally important product. Thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us, because I think that, it's definitely a space that we need to continue to focus on in a very serious way, because protecting occupant safety is tantamount to, like, the building can be as pretty as somebody wants it to be, but if it doesn't keep people safe, that's just a no-go. So I'd like to close. We have a primary goal for the podcast, and that's to build a catalog of wisdom for the industries that we serve. So, is there one piece of industry wisdom that you would like to share with our audience today?
Yes. Okay. So my perspective is a little bit different, right? I'm very lucky. I was in the trades, right? So I got to build the walls. Then I got into construction defects and I got to see where they fail. And then I got into manufacturing where I got to do product development. So I really get to see it from all sides. And here's what I've realized: communication is key.
Hmm.
So if when you're doing your design, okay, for your fire stopping, always have a pre-con meeting, pre-construction meeting to
Mm-hmm.
talk about the needs of the job. I'll tell you what, some of the reason why construction defects ran rapid in the past is because there was a lack of communication. And the contractor starts a job and then finds out he's doing it wrong. They're doing it wrong. Now they got to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, now what do I do? So now RFIs are going to go back and forth. Everybody thinks everybody's trying to rip everybody else off. And it's all because we didn't have a pre-con meeting. So
Mm-hmm.
that's critical to
Mm.
avoid construction defects. That would be my piece of advice. Just talk about it in the beginning. Make sure everybody's on the same page. I had a call earlier today, and a guy called me, sending me pictures from a phone. And a contractor got awarded the fire stopping after the job already started, and he's asking me for advice. What do I do? The drywall's already up there.
Oh
I
man.
said, if it was me, I'd remove the drywall, do the preform fire stopping, get an inspection, and then cover it back up. Because if you start putting fires on there right now and the inspector comes out and can't see it because everything's covered up, you're ripping everything out. So have a
Mm.
pre-con meeting right now. It's going to slow you down in the beginning, but it's going to speed you up in the end.
Well, and that saves materials. So for me, one of my biggest things that I like to champion is, like, let's not waste materials, right? So I think that's a great piece of wisdom. Communication is always key. And that's really a central point of this podcast, is to share this information out to as many people as possible so that we can all be on the same page on how we're moving this industry forward. So I just want to thank you for coming here today and for sharing what you know about this really vital space in the industry.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed doing this. That was a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you. So this is going to conclude the educational portion of this podcast, and we're going to move into a little bit of information about Don Pilz and the company that he works for. So let's go ahead and get started.
Work for CEMCO. We've got plants in Texas, 2 in California, and 1 in Denver. We do all this preform fire stopping that we do. I will say that the way we are different is we have the fire rated drywall accessories, and we've got the preform fire stopping that sticks directly to the track. We also have high deflection movement in our fire rip product. So what makes us unique is we check more boxes for fire stopping than any other fire stopping manufacturer out there, because we could do it before the drywall goes on or after the drywall goes on. And we've
Hmm.
got a lot of different aesthetically pleasing products that look really good. CEMCO can get it out there nationwide. CEMCO's also partnered up with Trimtex and Merino Wear. So out in the East, they also supply these products as well. And I guess the best place to get the information for catalogs and whatnot on CEMCO would be at the website for CEMCO, which is CEMCOsteel.com. Or if you've got any kind of questions for fire stopping, you can reach out to me too at dpilz, that's DPILZ, at CEMCOsteel.com.
And that is CEMCO with an E.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure that we
CEMCO, yes.
yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Well, this is great information. Let's get it out there so that we can continue to protect lives nationwide. Thank you again so much for being here, and we really enjoyed talking with you today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Spec Shaman Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our show and leave us a review. The Spec Shaman Podcast is produced by Laura Elliott and Brad Blank. A huge thank you to our guests who made this show possible. Building product manufacturers who want to increase their specification opportunities, please visit specshaman.com or ronblank.com. Thanks all for this episode, folks. See you next time.